All right, James 4, start in verse 11. Somebody read 11 and 12, and we'll use that to start the discussion.
So don't speak evil against each other, dear brothers and sisters. If you criticize and judge each other, then you are criticizing and judging God's law. But your job is to obey the law, not to judge whether it applies to you. God alone, who gave you the law, is the judge. He alone has the power to save or to destroy. So what right do you have to judge your neighbor?
Okay. So this gets into some of that hot button language that we don't like to use, talking about judging and things like that. And so I think there's some good things to talk about out of this section. But we start with the idea of not speaking evil against each other. And usually what they're talking about here would be the idea of speaking evil of someone in that person's absence. Because if I talk about Josh when he's not in the room, how can Josh defend himself? How can Josh correct me if I'm wrong? So it tends to be about the person is absent, but I'm criticizing, insulting, slandering, whatever. And, sometimes we'll listen to that. And the problem is the person who will talk to you about someone will also talk about you when you're not around normally, right? The person that'll talk about people, they're kind of indiscriminate about who they'll talk about a lot of times. So it's something we got to watch. This idea is condemned elsewhere in Scripture. Romans 1, you go to the end of Romans 1, there's this big laundry list of bad. Somebody read 28 through 32.
Since they thought it was going.
We'll take it. You there? Yeah, I'm there. Since they thought it was foolish to acknowledge God, He abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. They are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, and boastful. They invent new ways of sinning, and they disobey their parents. They refuse to understand, break their promises, and are heartless and have no mercy. And no, God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die if they do them anyway, or yet they encourage others to do them.
All right. So it's a really scathing statement. And thrown right in the middle of all of that is malicious behavior, gossip, backstabbers. Slander is in one translation. Some of the older translation use another word that really paints a vivid picture for me, but the idea of backbiting, that's an old-timey church word, but it kind of does paint a picture. If somebody's biting you in the back, I mean, you can't do much about that, right? There's hard to be attacked from behind.
It says they invent new ways.
And they invent new ways of sinning. That
Well,
one's
that was, I run on that outcome.
on the gossip part of it, does it matter whether or not it's true?
I mean, no, it needs to be zero.
I like that. What now?
It needs to be zero.
What,
I
right.
mean, just because you know something doesn't mean everybody has to know.
Right. It's the fact that it's true doesn't mean that it's not gossip. It can still be evil speaking. Some things are better not said, right? Barclay had a thought-provoking statement. He said, people are slow to realize that there are few sins which the Bible so unsparingly condemns as the sin of irresponsible and malicious gossip. There are few activities in which the average person finds more delight than spicy gossip, to tell and listen to the slanderous story, especially about some distinguished person. My take on it is, it would be healthy for us to reach the point where we genuinely hate knowing bad things about people. Because is there a part of us that kind of likes to know bad things about people? And if so, why? What is the attraction in that?
I don't know, you feel like you may have like a one-up on somebody because you know something about them and they don't know that you know it. But
knowledge is power to some
Yeah.
people, so it could be some of that.
And of course, Hannah can vouch for it, you know, teachers, I mean, not necessarily you or anything, but teachers just.
And I thought you were throwing her under the bus.
Sure, no. That's right. You know, when you got that many people, that close, that many families, that many situations, that many, you know, if one screw up, then everybody knows it, then with, you know, and everybody's got that one person they know that, well, if they ever found out, then they told everybody, you know?
Right. Yeah, and I mean, it goes along with ministry too, because sometimes people need to talk to you about things. And you want to try to help people. But man, in a lot of cases, I'd really rather not know that person has that bad thing going on in their life.
Yeah, you know, just thing is, can't be known and can't be cared.
Right.
That's what she'll tell. She had.
Um, Barclay says James is condemning this practice for two reasons. He says, first, it is a breach of the royal law. He says there in the text, I got to get back to James 4. It's back still over in Romans, sorry. If you criticize and judge each other, you're criticizing and judging God's law. The royal law, one translation says. James 2, verse 8, it's kind of a callback, very specific command being violated. If you read 2, verse 8, it says, yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. If I am talking about you, am I loving you in the same way I love myself? Not really. And so I'm violating that idea. Matthew 19, verse 19, honor your father and mother, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That's the part of the royal law that I violate when I decide that I'm going to gossip about people. He also says if a man breaks this law and does so knowingly, he's judging the law by setting himself above the law. In other words, well, the law doesn't apply to me. Do we do that sometimes? We've got a stop sign in our neighborhood that we did not need. We had some parents. And the reason we didn't need a stop sign is because we already have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit. So all we really need people to do is just obey the law that already exists. But we have people that are flying through there. So these people got a stop sign put in. And so I started off just ignoring it. But then I was talking to my neighbor and he said, well, I don't like it, but I'm stopping because I'm afraid if we don't, they're going to put speed bumps in. And that'd be even worse.
That's what we.
The speed bumps would be worse. So
I don't think in-laws have it in their neighborhood, and that is the most aggravating stuff.
well, and then there are parts of Muscle Shoals where for drainage, they have basically inverted speed bumps in some of the neighborhoods where if you're not paying attention, you'll about bottom out, if you're in a car.
Josh is really bad.
Yeah. So you got to crawl, and it's not for speed, it's for drainage, but it works the same way. But the point is, in a sense, that stop sign in my neighborhood, I've passed judgment on that stop sign and decided that really doesn't need to apply. It would. Might be a little loud at night, but we could get it going.
I got a Milwaukee, better have that on off.
But all he's saying is we could get it going. But if I know God says to love my neighbor as myself, but I'm going to choose to gossip about people, I'm basically setting myself above the law. And you get a little bit of a different flavor when you read the NLT that Josh read for us. If you criticize and judge each other, then you're criticizing and judging God's law. But your job is to obey the law, not to judge whether it applies to you. And that's a really good way of putting it too. The second thing he says, though, that we're violating there, he says it's an infringement of the prerogative of God. If God has created a law and I choose to ignore it, I am infringing on God's prerogative to be God, really. And so if I'm speaking evil of someone, in effect, I'm passing judgment on them. So anyway,
So imagine things come to mind with this scripture specifically revolving around the gospel aspect of it. But imagine being an elder, all the burden that they've got to carry with knowing bad things about people. And, you know, that's the flip side of this.
well, and that's another thing. Sometimes, and I'm glad you bring that up, because sometimes decisions, say, are made in a church context, and a group of elders is making a decision based on information that they have. And sometimes the decision may not make a whole lot of sense to us, but the information that they're using to try to lead would not necessarily all be appropriate for them to share broadly. And so sometimes what we don't understand, we need to be careful about passing judgment on, because they may be operating with, based on some parameters or some information or some situations that we're just not aware of. Now, other side of that is good leadership is being as transparent as you can be and still be appropriate. You need to share what you can share, but you can't share everything because you would violate trust, you violate confidence. So they do walk a fine line. It is a burden. But with all that being said, this is the time where you all need to be thinking about serving in that role at some point when the time's right. I mean, and not let this kind of thing scare you away from that, because this is the time that you qualify yourself for that work.
Yeah, Josh.
Just trying to get the clap.
I mean, it should be, it's not necessarily going to be everybody, but it's just the idea of staying open to the idea that I might be called on to lead in that way at some point, and then just being open to it, at least to consider it. Church needs spiritual leadership, always does. Anything else y'all want to add on that before we kind of change gears to the next paragraph?
So would you consider, this is just on my kind of training, would you consider it gossip if this is I had something like this happen today. One of my best friends from Auburn called me today. Another one of our best friends, like fiance, broke off the engagement, pretty much like
Right,
went AWOL and really bad stuff.
right,
And I mean, he told me that because we care about him.
right.
And so I guess there is a difference between sharing bad things about other people with good intentions.
If you're close, it may be an opportunity for you to minister to him.
Right.
And knowing that it's going on. And I think that is different. And there's also the aspect, if something's going on where you have the potential to be hurt by somebody, then a warning, we have laws. If a sex offender moves into your neighborhood, there's a law that says that has to go up as public notice because people could be hurt.
Right.
And so a lot of times gossip isn't about protecting, somebody from being hurt. It's just about getting the information out there because it's fun to talk about. And that's different than, hey, this person that's gotten real close to you, you need to have your guard up, because you could be hurt. I think there's a difference there. And it always comes down to what's the motivation, what's the heart. And the beauty of that is, and the reason he talks about us not passing judgment on people is because that's with God. And God's going to get it right. God knows the heart. God knows the reason why we share things and why we talk about things. And I hope you can minister to your friend. And of course, he may have been telling you to say, are you sure you want to get married?
Well, no, he was kind of joking with me about that, but he's a very good guy. And that was kind of what brought it up. I just asked if he was okay.
Yeah, right.
Is he all right? Because I haven't talked to him and it's not like necessarily public knowledge.
Right.
I'm not sure that he knows that I know,
Right.
but I was told that just to be aware, hey, if this comes up.
And it may be an opportunity to help him.
But
somewhere.
apparently he's just fine.
Okay.
So,
Well,
today.
it may have all been for the best then.
Yeah, maybe.
Of course, some people say they're fine when they're not. So that's another thing to, it's especially for males. We're wired to not show weakness or trained to not show weakness, so.
He has a really good, like, he went to Auburn Church of Christ with me down there, and so he has a really good, like, relationship with God, and
Good.
he's very strong in
Good.
his relationship with God, so.
That's good. All right. Anything else on that? All right, somebody read 13 through 17.
Look here, you who say, today or tomorrow, we are going to a certain town and will stay there a year. We will do business there and make a profit. How do you know what your life will be like tomorrow? Your life is like the morning fog. It's here a little while, then it's gone. What you ought to say is, if the Lord wants us to, we will live and do this or that. Otherwise, you are boasting about your own pretentious plans, and all such boasting is evil. Remember, it is sin to know what you ought to do and then not do it.
Okay, and I always like hearing verse 17 in its context, because you get what he's just been talking about, and then he throws that in, and usually verse 17, we kind of use it as a standalone statement. So anybody got any plans for tomorrow? I do.
Unfortunately, I got my work.
Yeah. Do you have a to-do list already made for when you get there? Do you know what you got to do when you arrive?
5 o'clock, get it running.
Get it running. So is this vilifying the making of plans? Is that the purpose of this past part of the letter? Does anybody have a paragraph heading?
Self-confidence, warning about.
Yeah.
Warnings against or about self-confidence, and that strikes at at what's really going on here. Now, there is some, I thought the background on this was helpful, understanding some of the Jewish background. The Jews were great traders, and the ancient world provided a lot of opportunity for them to practice commercial trading and all that kind of thing. It was also an age and a time of founding new cities. You're going to put in a new city, and if you're going to have a city, what do you need in the city? You need residents. You need people to live in the city. And so when cities were founded, the people founding the city would try to go find citizens, and citizenship was often freely offered to the Jews, because the statement was with the Jews came money and trade. And so you're bringing some of what you need into the city. And so it paints this picture of a guy kind of looking at a map, and he looks at a city and says, I'm going to go there. I'm going to get it on the ground floor. I'll trade for a year or so. I'll make my money. I'll get rich, and then I'll get out, that kind of thing. And James's point is that no person has a right to make constant and confident plans for the future, for no man knows what even a day may bring. He says, man may propose, but it is God who disposes, for the future is in the hands of God. And so it's trying to plan without God being in the middle of the plan. Proverbs 27 verse 1, and this is New American Standard, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. And that's basically what's being quoted here by James in the passage. One of the key stories from Jesus on this is the rich man has the great harvest, has more harvest than he has places to store it. And so what does he choose to do? I'm going to tear down what I got. I'm going to build bigger. And then once I've built bigger, I can store all this. And then what will I do? I'll take it easy. And in his story, he's condemned for not being generous. You've been blessed. And the way generosity is connected to God is in the last verse of that. This is Luke 12, verse 21. So is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. If that guy had taken some of his harvest and used it to bless people in need, that would have equated to being rich toward God. And so that's why on that night, his life is required of him. And Jesus in the parable, or has God saying, you fool, you haven't included God in the plan. Seneca said, how foolish it is for a man to make plans for his life when not even a tomorrow is in his control. And again, it doesn't mean we don't have a plan for tomorrow. I like having a list. There's apparently a little thing that goes off in your brain, a chemical release or something, when you make a check mark by something on your list. I like a list. I like making check marks. And I don't believe that's the kind of thing that's being vilified here, but it's making a plan without God. The rabbis had a proverb, care not for the morrow, for you know not what a day may bring forth. Perhaps you may not find tomorrow. And that's been classic in music. If tomorrow never comes, all these songs about, well, what if there is no tomorrow? I mean, it's classic songwriting fodder. And so, it's the idea, James isn't saying that the uncertainty of the future should cause fear or inaction. It's the reason for accepting and realizing our complete dependence on God. My plan is going to be based on the fact that at the bottom of the plan is this relationship with God that will not be compromised. No matter what I'm planning to do, God is going to be in the middle of it, and he's going to be the foundation of it. And Paul operated this way, 1 Corinthians 4, verse 19, but I'll come to you soon if the Lord wills, and I shall find out not the words of those who are arrogant, but their power. So I'm planning to come if that's what God wants me to do. So Barclay's take on it seems to be that even though Jewish literature promoted the idea of the future being uncertain, and even though some non-Jewish literature out there promoted the idea of if God wills, the Jews apparently hadn't learned to bring God into the plan like they should. And how ironic is that? Who had been God's people? The Jews. If anybody's going to have God in the plan, it should be the Jews. But apparently they're short on that. They're not doing it right. So this section's not about being paralyzed to inaction by fear or uncertainty, but rather to commit the future and all of our plans into the hands of God, and always remember that our plans may not be within the purpose of God. And that's another thing to think in terms of. If I've got a plan that I know has ethical implications or is going to violate some law of God, I shouldn't have that plan, because I can't have that plan and say that God is the foundation of my life. If I know that I'm trying to cut a corner, or I'm trying to take advantage of somebody, or I'm trying to do something the wrong way, those two things don't go together. So verse 16, to not include God is to be boastful and arrogant. And some background here. It says the word from which we get the translation arrogant boasting was originally the characteristic of a wandering quack. In other words, he offers cures that are not cures, boasted of things he was not able to do. The medicine man, miracle cure wasn't going to work. Well, trying to be arrogant like this and not include God, it's like being that guy, is kind of what he's saying. And then verse 17, it kind of puts some context on the threat that James concludes with. Remember, it is sin to know what you ought to do and not do it. Well, we've been talking about speaking evil of others, gossip, slander, all that, living life, making all these grandiose plans and not having God in the middle of it. If a man knows he ought to include God but doesn't, it's sinful. So, any thoughts on plans? Any of that? I think it's fairly straightforward. And I'll say this, is this saying that if you make a plan for tomorrow and you don't say out loud, if the Lord wills, that you've committed a sin? I don't believe that's what's being taught either. I don't know that we've got to say that out.
I think we do. I think we gotta say it out loud. I think we just started doing it.
Well, and there are some people.
Swords and chains.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's talking about longing to come visit.
Right.
He's longing to go here. He's going to do this, or he's sending this. He's sending Timothy, or whatever. Whatever.
Yeah.
All these he's making plans. I mean, I don't think it's saying that.
Not at all.
I don't think it's saying.
Well, and I mean, there are some people,
Telling you to-
and I will say it, I mean, a lot of us will say it, if Lord wills, you know, we incorporate that.
Lord willing, Monday, we'll be doing this, you know.
And the words we use all the time, we have to guard against them becoming, not having meaning anymore. It's just part of what we say, and we don't even think about what we're saying. We gotta be careful of that. But it also doesn't mean that I don't have that in my mindset when I'm talking about what I'm going to do tomorrow, even if I haven't said, well, if the Lord wills. If, you know,
It's kind of like what Trey put on Facebook about his dad. I don't remember all the words. It was a Bible verse, you know, talking about, you know, the future,
right.
you know, longing for heaven or whatever. So I mean, it's
I think there's a lesson to be learned from the way his dad faced that. As far as saying, I'm ready to go home. I know what's ahead is better than what's here. I think that's a hard mindset to embrace, to actually be faced with, I may not be here much longer, and I'm not gonna fight for a bunch more days that might not work out so well, because I think there's something to be learned from the way his dad faced that.
I was talking to Glitch about it last couple weeks ago. I was just like how, you know, Trey, and he actually, I think Trey called him that day anyways. Sam was like, yeah, Sam was mad because he didn't pass in sleep last night.
He's been wanting.
You know, and that's what me and Butch was, talking like that, you know.
You've been through a lot of health issues.
I agree,
you know,
and I'm not gonna say he's lived his life. I don't like that word. I don't like that phrase. But, you know, here's a guy in his older years has lived life, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything that probably come with it throughout his entire life. Marriage, kids, grandkids. He's ready.
well,
And then I'm 34.
Sam's lived a rough life.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, like, I don't know his whole story. I know, but I'm 34 and I got 2 kids. I mean,
well, and
I want to see my kids grow up. I want to see, you know, so I have that, it's that mixed feeling like, yes, we long for heaven. Yes, we want to go. We want to be in the presence of Jesus and get this old world sinful body away and have the new body, the new life, a new beginning, a new everything. But yet we're kind of hesitant about longing for that.
right.
But I know we should be longing for that.
You're in a different stage of your life.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's,
Well, and that's,
You long for it is different than for him.
yes, I long to go to heaven. Yeah, I pray
If
all
you-
the time.
It's easier for him. It's more difficult for you.
if you reach a point in life where, yeah, I would enjoy more healthy days to spend, but if you've reached the point where in all practical sense, your work is done,
Mhm.
because his work was done. I mean, he's raised his family. And he's got family members who are faithfully serving the Lord. And so in that sense, that's mission accomplished.
I agree.
And so, yeah, if I'm healthy and have more days, that's all good. But if it's time to go, I've got something to look forward to, and I've done my job. So, you know, that probably plays into it as well. So anyway, it does give us something to think about. Sure does. All right. Well, I appreciate.